We left off last time with our question, what is knowledge? And we now know that for Aya, giving a philosophical analysis of that question is to try and find what we called necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. And that's what Aya spends quite a lot of the reading discussing. What are necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge? So, for example, when Aya discusses whether knowing something consists in being in some sort of special state of mind, he brings up the case of being sure of something. Now, of course, when you know something, you're sure of it. To say, I know that the earth is round, but I'm not sure, well, that would be a very strange thing to say. But that's not the case with belief. In the ancient world, for example, it might have made perfect sense for someone to say, I believe that the earth is round, but I'm not sure. Or today, there are people who say that they believe, for example, that God exists, but they're not sure. So being sure seems to be necessary for knowledge. We have to be sure of the things we know. It's not necessary, though, for belief. We can believe things that we're not sure about. At the same time, Aya also shows that being sure can't be sufficient for knowledge. Let's go back to our ancient world. Many people back then were sure that the earth was flat, but they were wrong. So being sure is not enough to make something knowledge. They may have thought they knew that, but of course we can say they didn't. So we're looking for necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. And we can say that being sure of something is certainly not a sufficient condition for knowledge, even if it might be a necessary condition. What can we then say about conditions for knowledge? Well, when we say that someone knows something, the first thing we can say is that the thing known must be true. Again, just think about the statement, I know that the earth is flat. Now, we would obviously tell somebody making that statement that they were deluded. You can't possibly know that the earth is flat because it's not true. You could actually, of course, believe the earth was flat because we can believe things that aren't true. When it comes to knowledge, it must be that what I know is true. When it comes to belief, it can be that what I believe is false. This contributes in part to one of the fundamental points that Aya makes in this reading, that if we're trying to define knowledge, we can't be looking for some special state of mind. If the first condition of knowledge is that what is known must be true, we can understand the problem with defining knowledge by appeal to a state of mind, especially, say, a state of certainty. Because the point is, my certainty about something can never make it true. Whether or not something is true depends on whether the world is actually the way that I'm describing it, not on how sure I am of something. The truth doesn't depend on what I think. It depends on the way things are, on the whole, independently of my thoughts. I might be absolutely sure that the tooth fairy exists, for example, but I'd be wrong. I'm presuming you're all old enough to hear this difficult truth now. Now, from this, we can maybe begin to build up what was for a long time the traditional philosophical analysis of knowledge with which Aya more or less concludes his piece. Let's present things formally as follows. In this slide, A stands in for any person, P is the statement known, and IFF, that stands for if and only if, which is the way that we say that things are necessary and sufficient conditions for something. If you think about that a little bit, you might be able to work out why. Now, Aya's version of things is that A knows that P, if and only if, number one, P is true. Number two, A is sure that P. And number three, A has the right to be sure that P. Let's take the earth is round. I know that the earth is round. Now, the earth is round is true. I'm also sure that the earth is round. Do I have the right to be sure that the Earth is round. Let's change this up a little bit, because the more traditional way of putting this, very, very similar to Aya's presentation here, is as follows. A knows that P if and only if number 1, P is true, number 2, A believes that P, and number 3, A's belief that P is justified. Now this is known as the justified true belief model of knowledge, and it so happens that there's a whole industry that has grown up around this analysis. A philosopher called Edmund Gettier showed it doesn't actually work, and that led philosophers to try to add further conditions to make it work. Now, you'll be glad to know we don't need to get into all those details. What I do want you to think about, however, is why all 3 of these conditions were thought to be needed to give us a full analysis of knowledge. The claim here is that to know something, it must be true, you must believe it, and the belief must be justified. And in your final exercise this week, I'm hoping you're going to tell me why it is that those 3 conditions are indeed required in combination to give us a full analysis of knowledge. After that, it will be onwards and upwards to week 2.